The hotel lobby was buzzing with activity. Guests rushing in and out, staff juggling phone calls and luggage, the air thick with the faint scent of expensive perfume and polished floors. But amid all this chaos, one man walked in quietly, his presence so calm it almost seemed to pause time. That man was Jonathan Roumie. He approached the front desk with nothing but a gentle smile and a reservation in hand. There were no flashy cars outside, no entourage following him, no cameras, just him, walking in like any ordinary guest. Yet what happened next would shock everyone who saw it. The concierge, a man in his 40s with a booming voice and an ego to match, glanced at Jonathan with thinly veiled disdain. "Sir, this is a busy night," he said, smirking. "Maybe you should try another hotel." Jonathan's smile didn't falter. He calmly placed his reservation on the counter. "I just want to check in." "That's all," he said. His voice was soft, almost melodic, but it carried a quiet authority that made some guests glance over in curiosity. The concierge laughed outright, waving dismissively at him. "We don't serve people like you here," he said. "Some of us have standards." A few hotel staff snickered nervously, pointing at Jonathan behind his back, whispering to each other. A couple of guests raised their eyebrows, unsure if they should step in. But Jonathan remained perfectly still, his eyes scanning the lobby, calm as a still lake, unshaken by the mockery or the rising tension. And then it happened. One of the junior clerks, clearly uncomfortable, whispered to a colleague, "Isn't that Jonathan Roumie?" Jonathan didn't respond. He simply nodded slightly, keeping his composure. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand respect. He let the situation speak for itself. But the air in the lobby had changed. Every eye, every whisper, every smirk felt the subtle weight of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The concierge, still convinced he was in control, leaned over the counter and sneered. "Look, I don't care who you are. You can't stay here tonight." He tossed the reservation onto the desk like it was trash. What happened next would leave everyone stunned. In that very moment, the hotel staff didn't realize they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The Grand Sunrise Hotel was known for its luxury, polished marble floors and a staff trained to perfection, or so the management thought. Behind the gleaming counters and perfectly arranged flowers, the hierarchy of power was clear. At the very top of the lobby's unspoken hierarchy stood the concierge, a man named Victor. Sharp suit, gold cufflinks, and an attitude that could slice glass. To him, running the hotel wasn't about hospitality. It was about control, about reminding everyone that he was the person in charge. Victor loved showing off his power. On busy nights like this, he strutted around the lobby, barking orders at the staff, flashing his designer watch, and making sure guests knew who ran the show. He delighted in making others feel small, taking pride in the nervous smiles and forced nods of the employees who feared crossing him. Arrogance had always been his armor, and so far it had served him well. But then Jonathan Roumie entered. Jonathan didn't storm in with cameras or flashing lights. He didn't demand attention. He didn't need to. There was a quiet confidence about him, a calm aura that seemed to slow the chaos around him. The hotel lobby, filled with chattering guests and clattering luggage, felt oddly still when he walked through the doors. Even the decorative fountain in the corner seemed to ripple a little slower, as if sensing the change in energy. He approached the front desk, casual yet purposeful, hands resting lightly on the edge of the marble countertop. Victor, of course, noticed him immediately, but instead of recognition, he felt something he wasn't used to, a twinge of doubt. He waved the staff over, whispering loudly enough for a few guests to overhear. "Watch this. Another nobody thinks they belong here," he muttered with a smirk. Jonathan placed his reservation neatly on the counter. The slip of paper looked ordinary, just a name, a date, a confirmation number, but Victor barely glanced at it before making his judgment. "Sir, we're completely booked tonight," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Perhaps you should find somewhere else. This hotel isn't for everyone." A few staff members stifled snickers, exchanging looks that said finally someone else to ridicule. They didn't notice how calm Jonathan remained, how his eyes, warm but steady, seemed to quietly measure the arrogance in the room. "I just want to check in," Jonathan said softly, almost in a whisper, yet the words cut through the murmurs of the lobby. "Is that possible?" Victor scoffed. "I don't think you understand, sir. Some of us have standards. You clearly don't meet them." He leaned across the counter, assuming his authority would intimidate. "Now leave, or I'll have security escort you out." At this point, the murmuring guests were starting to notice the scene. Phones subtly emerged from pockets. A woman at a nearby table paused mid-sip of her coffee. An older clerk, someone who had been at the hotel for decades, narrowed his eyes. There was something familiar about Jonathan's face, something he couldn't quite place. Jonathan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just smiled faintly, a smile that carried patience, understanding, and the quiet assurance of someone who had faced arrogance before and had learned how to handle it. "Sometimes," he said almost conversationally, "arrogance blinds the eyes that should see clearly." Victor's smirk faltered, but only slightly. He wasn't used to being challenged with words so gentle yet so firm. His mind raced. Who was this man? Why wasn't he intimidated? The staff, sensing a shift, grew uneasy. The junior clerks exchanged nervous glances. The guests leaned forward subtly, curiosity piqued. A young bellhop whispered to a colleague, barely audible, "Isn't that Jonathan Roumie?" The older clerk's eyes widened as recognition struck. "That's him," he muttered under his breath. But it was too late. Victor still believed he was in control, still thought he could dismiss Jonathan with a wave of his hand. Victor's ego wouldn't allow him to pause, wouldn't allow him to simply check the man in. He picked up the reservation and tossed it onto the counter, as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper. "I don't care who you are," he said loudly, addressing Jonathan directly. "You can't stay here tonight." Jonathan's eyes didn't flash with anger, but they held something far stronger. Calm authority. "Very well," he said quietly, stepping back. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He didn't need to. In that moment, the lobby fell into an unusual silence. Guests stopped mid-conversation, staff froze in their tracks, and even Victor felt a strange weight in the room, an invisible force that reminded him he was not as untouchable as he believed. Little did Victor know, this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The lesson that Jonathan Roumie was about to teach the hotel staff would shake the lobby to its core and leave everyone who witnessed it with a story they would never forget. Victor, the concierge, was certain he had the upper hand. He had spent years asserting his dominance in the Grand Sunrise Hotel, making staff and guests alike bow to his ego. But now something about Jonathan Roumie unsettled him. Calm, composed, and unshaken, Jonathan wasn't reacting the way anyone normally did when dismissed. That alone irritated Victor more than he could admit. Victor leaned closer to the counter, his sharp eyes narrowing. "You think this is funny, don't you?" he snapped, his voice rising. "This is a hotel, not a playground for people who think they're special." "Get out!" Jonathan's smile never wavered. "I'm not here to play games," he said softly, his voice smooth yet firm. "I simply wish to be treated like anyone else, fairly and respectfully." A few staff exchanged glances, nervously whispering behind the counter. Some were beginning to sense that this encounter was about more than a check-in. The guests, too, were leaning in slightly, intrigued by the calm defiance in Jonathan's posture. The lobby had grown tense, every rustle of a paper, every footstep echoing like a drumbeat in anticipation. Victor's pride wouldn't allow him to back down. He waved a hand toward the trash bin behind the counter, a mocking gesture meant to humiliate Jonathan. "Here," he sneered. "We don't need reservations like this cluttering our counters. Maybe this belongs in the bin." The staff laughed, a cruel hollow sound that echoed in the lobby. Some pulled out their phones, secretly filming the encounter. They expected Jonathan to react, to argue, to lose his composure like any ordinary guest. But he didn't. He simply looked at the concierge, then glanced around the lobby. The corners of his mouth lifted in a faint smile, patient yet pointed. "Sometimes," Jonathan said quietly, almost to himself, "the ones who think they're in control are the ones most blind to reality." The words, gentle yet sharp, cut through the room. Victor's face twitched. He felt a sudden unease, a prickling at the back of his neck. He couldn't place it, but something was off. Who was this man? How could someone be so calm, so unshakable in the face of blatant disrespect? Victor, refusing to be outdone, snatched the reservation from the counter and crumpled it in his hands. "Enough," he barked. "I said leave." Jonathan didn't move. He simply extended a hand toward the crumpled paper, as if to retrieve it, but stopped just short. Instead, he looked directly at Victor, his gaze steady. "It's not the paper that matters," he said softly. "It's the respect that should have accompanied it." A hush fell over the lobby. The guests leaned forward, some holding their breath. The staff, who had been quietly amused moments ago, now felt a shift in the air, a subtle but unmistakable power that didn't rely on authority, on position, or on arrogance. Victor's ego had hit its peak. He stepped back, shaking his head, disbelief etched into his face. I don't understand," he stammered. You're just a guest." Jonathan nodded slightly. "That's true. Today I am a guest. But respect isn't reserved for guests or for those with power or for those with wealth. It's shown to everyone, always." At that moment, an older clerk who had stayed quiet throughout the confrontation finally spoke. "Wait, I've seen you before," he murmured under his breath. "That's Jonathan Roumie, the actor, the man people look up to. The one who inspires millions." The realization rippled through the lobby. Phones were quickly raised. Whispers spread like wildfire. And the staff who had been laughing moments ago now stared, mouths agape. Victor's smug confidence crumbled, replaced by panic. The arrogance that had fueled him for years now felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Jonathan took a small step back, allowing the tension to linger for just a moment longer. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice, didn't demand an apology. He simply stood there embodying calm authority, letting the situation speak for itself. Victor, finally recognizing the mistake he had made, felt heat rising to his face. He realized that in his arrogance he had humiliated himself in front of his staff, his guests, and most importantly someone who carried genuine power of presence, of humility and of respect earned, not assumed. For the first time that evening, the lobby felt silent, every person frozen in the moment. Jonathan had not fought with anger or authority. He had fought with patience, calmness, and quiet dignity, a force far stronger than arrogance or ego. Victor's mind raced, searching for an excuse, a way to reclaim control. But he knew deep down that nothing could undo what had just happened. The lesson had been delivered, and Jonathan Roumie, with nothing more than a gentle voice and unwavering calm, had already won. The lobby had gone silent. Every guest, every staff member, every clerk frozen in their tracks. The usual hustle of the Grand Sunrise Hotel, the clattering luggage, the ringing phones, the chattering voices had vanished. For the first time, the hum of arrogance that Victor had cultivated over years was replaced by something heavier, a quiet, commanding presence. Jonathan Roumie stood near the counter, calm, collected, yet somehow undeniably powerful. The junior clerks whispered among themselves. "Did you see that?" One said almost in disbelief. "He didn't even raise his voice." "I know," another replied, shaking their head. "And Victor? He's speechless. I've never seen him like this before." Guests in the lobby exchanged curious glances. Phones were discreetly raised, trying to capture the moment. A mother hushed her child, sensing the gravity of the situation. Even the bellhop paused mid-step, luggage in hand, as though the entire hotel had collectively inhaled. Victor, meanwhile, was scrambling internally. He had spent years cultivating an image of authority, of control. And now, in front of everyone, he had been stripped of it. Not by confrontation, not by anger, but by the calm, quiet confidence of a man he had underestimated. He could feel the heat rising in his face, the tingling in his hands, the undeniable shame that spread through him like wildfire. You can't just..." Victor stammered, searching for words. But nothing came. Every phrase, every threat, every insult that had once flowed easily from his mouth now seemed meaningless. Jonathan Roumie didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't even raise his voice. And that silence, so controlled, so intentional, was louder than any shouting could have been. The older clerk, who had been quietly observing from the back, finally stepped forward. His eyes widened as recognition hit him. "Wait, I've seen him somewhere," he muttered almost to himself. That's Jonathan Roumie, the actor, the one from all the shows, the man people admire everywhere." The revelation spread like wildfire. The staff who had been laughing moments ago now whispered in shock. Guests began to murmur, some nudging each other, pointing toward the counter. Phones were raised higher now, videos being recorded, the tension turning into a quiet fascination. Victor's smirk had vanished entirely. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly powerless in front of everyone he had once commanded. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie, a vain attempt to reclaim composure. But nothing could erase the realization he had misjudged this man, underestimated him completely, and humiliated himself in the process. Jonathan, noticing the shift but remaining serene, took a measured step back. His calmness wasn't arrogance, it was presence, a quiet strength that filled the room without needing words. He didn't demand apologies. He didn't assert authority. He simply let the moment speak for itself, and it was speaking louder than anyone could have imagined. The guests, now fully attentive, began to realize that something extraordinary was unfolding. A woman sitting near the lobby fountain whispered, "He's unshakable. I've never seen someone stay so composed when insulted like that." A young bellhop, still clutching a suitcase, whispered to his colleague, "I think he's teaching us something." Even Victor could sense it. The arrogance that had fueled him for years felt hollow, meaningless. And for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, respect not commanded, but demanded by the quiet strength and dignity of another human being. Jonathan finally glanced around the lobby, meeting the eyes of staff, guests, and even Victor himself. There was no anger in his gaze, no resentment, only the silent reminder that true power doesn't shout, doesn't demand, and doesn't need to prove itself, it simply exists. And then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the lesson that had just been learned, and began to walk toward the elevators. Every step was deliberate, calm, and unhurried, yet somehow it felt like the ground itself was paying attention. The guests whispered excitedly among themselves. Phones continued recording, capturing the silent drama. Some clutched their bags tightly while others leaned forward, unable to look away. Even the older clerk at the back felt a shiver run down his spine, a combination of awe, respect, and disbelief. Victor stood frozen, staring at the retreating figure of Jonathan Roumie. The room was quiet, the tension lingering as though the walls themselves had absorbed the lesson. He finally realized something important. Respect cannot be demanded, it cannot be bought, and it cannot be faked. It must be given, and sometimes the ones you underestimate teach you that lesson in the most unforgettable way. And in that moment, as Jonathan disappeared from view behind the elevators, everyone in the lobby knew one thing for certain. This was a lesson they would never forget. The kind of lesson that would echo in their minds long after the hustle of the hotel returned. A lesson about humility, patience, and the silent power of respect. The lobby remained tense, the air thick with anticipation. Guests whispered, some still holding their phones, uncertain whether to record or simply watch. Staff lingered nervously, exchanging glances. Victor, the once proud concierge, felt as though the weight of the entire hotel had landed squarely on his shoulders. His chest tightened, his palms grew clammy, and every boastful memory of control now felt hollow. Then, the doors at the front of the lobby swung open with a quiet but commanding authority. A sleek black car pulled up outside, gleaming under the hotel lights. From it, 3 well-dressed executives stepped out, carrying briefcases and folders, moving with a purposeful urgency that immediately drew attention. Their eyes were fixed on the entrance. "Mr. Roumie, sir, we've been waiting for you," one of them called as they strode into the lobby. The entire room froze. Guests turned toward the voices, some gasping softly. Staff whispered, some covering their mouths in shock. Victor's face drained of color. He stumbled backward slightly, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. One of the executives stepped forward, presenting a folder with polished precision. "Sir, all the documents have been prepared for your review. Your new position takes effect immediately." Victor blinked, confusion and disbelief swirling in his mind. "Wait, Mr. Roumie? You mean that's him?" He stammered, his voice cracking. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by raw, exposed vulnerability. Jonathan Roumie turned slowly, his calm gaze sweeping across the room. "Yes," he said quietly, yet each word carried an undeniable authority. "I am the new majority owner of this hotel." A collective gasp swept through the lobby. The staff who had laughed at him just moments ago now stared in stunned silence. Guests whispered furiously, phones recording the unfolding drama. Victor felt his knees weaken slightly, the reality sinking in. He had not just disrespected a guest. He had insulted the owner of the very establishment he controlled. Jonathan's expression remained serene. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat, didn't demand apologies. Instead, he allowed the situation to speak for itself, letting the weight of truth settle over everyone present. The power in the room was no longer Victor's. It belonged to the quiet strength and dignity of Jonathan Roumie. One of the younger clerks, still clutching their tablet, whispered, "I can't believe this. The man we disrespected is the one who owns this place." Their voice trembled with awe. Victor's mind raced, trying to find a way to reclaim his dignity, to explain away his arrogance. But there was no excuse that could erase what had happened. The staff had witnessed the confrontation, the disrespect, and now the reveal. The humiliation was complete. Jonathan took a few deliberate steps toward the front desk, scanning the faces of the staff. His eyes, calm and unwavering, seemed to look right through the pretense and pride that had clouded the lobby just minutes before. "I came here today," he said, his voice gentle yet commanding, "to check in quietly like any other guest. But in doing so, I saw the truth of how respect is given, and how it is often denied to those who deserve it most." The older clerk from the back stepped forward, eyes wide. "Sir, we didn't know," he said softly, voice trembling. "We never meant any disrespect," Jonathan nodded slightly. "I understand. But that is exactly the problem. Respect should not be conditional on status, wealth, or appearances. It should be universal, shown to all." Victor sank slightly, realizing that the lesson was not just personal, it was a moral one for everyone present. His ego, built over years of arrogance and assumed authority, had been shattered not by force but by calm composure and undeniable integrity. Jonathan paused, looking back toward the entrance as the executives finalized their arrangements. "From this moment on," he said, "there will be changes. Some of them will be small, some significant, but the principle remains. Respect is earned through humility, not flaunted through arrogance." The lobby remained silent, the staff absorbing the words, the guests awed by the unfolding scene. Phones were still raised, capturing every moment. But even the technology couldn't contain the power of what had just happened. Victor, once the undisputed authority of the lobby, now realized something profound. Authority without humility is empty. Power without respect is fleeting. And arrogance, unchecked, leaves a person exposed to lessons they cannot ignore. Jonathan Roumie, having made his point without raising his voice, quietly turned toward the elevators. The lobby watched, rapt, as the man who had been underestimated and dismissed had not only revealed his identity, but also reminded everyone present of the true meaning of respect. In that moment, the staff knew one thing for certain. They had witnessed a lesson that would stay with them forever. The lobby remained in stunned silence. Guests and staff alike could barely process what had just happened. The air was thick with tension and disbelief. Victor, the once proud concierge, stood frozen, staring at Jonathan Roumie as though he were a figure from a dream. Someone too powerful, too calm, too dignified to have existed in the same space as him minutes ago. Jonathan took a slow step forward, his gaze sweeping across the staff who had witnessed the confrontation. He didn't shout. He didn't scold. He simply let the gravity of the moment settle over them. Every gesture, every pause, every glance radiated quiet authority and dignity. Victor, finally finding his voice, sank slightly toward the floor. "Sir, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his arrogance completely dissolved. "I didn't know who you were. I shouldn't have treated you like that. Please forgive me." Jonathan nodded, his expression calm and measured. "That's exactly the point," he said softly. "Respect should not be based on who someone is or what position they hold. It should be given to all people, regardless of status, and that is what makes the world a better place. One small act at a time." Victor's shoulders sagged as he processed the words. For the first time, he understood the weight of his actions, not just as a moment of humiliation, but as a reflection of his character. All the years he had relied on fear, arrogance, and power as a shield suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of humility and true authority. Jonathan turned toward the older clerk, the one who had remained respectful throughout the ordeal, the one who had quietly observed and never joined in mocking or laughing at his presence. "You," Jonathan said, locking eyes with the man, "have shown the kind of character that deserves recognition. From today forward, you will take responsibility for this branch as the new manager." The older clerk's eyes widened in shock. Me, sir? I don't know what to say. Jonathan smiled faintly, a gesture that was both reassuring and empowering. You don't need to say anything. Just continue to act with integrity, humility, and respect. That is all anyone should ever ask of you. The other staff, who had once been caught up in mockery or indifference, now looked at each other with newfound awareness. The lesson had been unmistakable. Arrogance and disrespect may make someone feel powerful for a moment, but true strength comes from calm, quiet authority and the ability to treat others with dignity. Victor, still kneeling, looked up at Jonathan with a mixture of awe and shame. Sir, and what should I do now? He asked, his voice trembling. Jonathan's gaze was steady, firm, but compassionate. You have a choice, he said. You can continue on the path of arrogance and risk repeating this mistake, or you can learn from it. Respect others, remain humble, and you will find strength you never knew you had. The choice is yours. For a long moment, Victor said nothing, simply absorbing the words. The weight of accountability pressed down on him, but for the first time it was not fear, it was clarity. He nodded slowly, an unspoken promise that he would try to change. Jonathan then took a final look around the lobby. The guests who had watched the entire scene were now whispering, some clapping quietly, some recording the moment, all of them in awe of what they had witnessed. His presence had transformed the space, not through force, but through dignity, humility, and respect. Without another word, Jonathan turned and walked toward the elevators. His steps were slow and deliberate, leaving a trail of silent authority behind him. The staff and guests watched, some still in shock, others filled with admiration, and a few silently vowing to carry the lesson with them in their own lives. Before disappearing from sight, he paused briefly at the elevator doors. Remember this, he said quietly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Respect is not given because of fear, or wealth, or power. Respect is given because it is the right thing to do. Never forget that. Then the doors closed. Jonathan Roumie was gone from the lobby, but the lesson he left behind lingered, heavier than any lecture, louder than any argument, and far more memorable than any display of force or authority. Victor slowly rose to his feet, his ego humbled, but his mind awakened. The staff gathered around the newly appointed branch manager, inspired by the events they had just witnessed. They knew the hotel would never be the same again, not because of ownership, but because of the values Jonathan had imparted with quiet authority. That day, the Grand Sunrise Hotel learned a timeless truth. Power is fleeting, arrogance is fragile, but respect, once earned and given freely, leaves a mark that lasts a lifetime. The Grand Sunrise Hotel had returned to its usual rhythm, phones ringing, luggage rolling, staff attending to guests. But the energy in the lobby was different now. It was as though the space itself had been subtly altered, reshaped by an event no one would ever forget. The lesson Jonathan Roumie had delivered was not loud or theatrical. It didn't require shouting, confrontation, or force. It had arrived quietly through calm authority, dignity, and a simple act of integrity. Victor, the once arrogant concierge, remained at the front desk, staring at the empty space where Jonathan had stood. His mind replayed every word, every glance, every silent moment from that encounter. He realized that in his desire to assert power, he had confused authority with respect, dominance with dignity, and fear with admiration. The truth was undeniable. Respect cannot be demanded. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be forced. It must be given, freely and consistently. The staff who had witnessed the event carried a mixture of awe and introspection. Those who had laughed, mocked, or whispered now found themselves questioning their own behavior, confronting their own arrogance or complacency. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that humility and respect were not signs of weakness, but of strength, a strength far more lasting than the fleeting power of ego or position. The older clerk, newly appointed branch manager, moved quietly through the lobby, checking in on staff with a renewed sense of purpose. He had witnessed firsthand the quiet power of integrity, and he understood that leadership was about more than titles or authority. It was about character. In that moment, he made a silent promise to lead with humility, to treat every guest and colleague with dignity, and to ensure that the lesson Jonathan had imparted would continue to resonate in the hotel's culture. Outside, the black car that had delivered Jonathan Roumie to the hotel pulled away, leaving the scene as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Yet everyone in the lobby knew differently. The guests who had watched the entire encounter unfold whispered among themselves, sharing what they had seen. Phones that had recorded videos now captured more than just an interaction. They captured a lesson in human decency, patience, and the quiet authority of respect. The moral was simple, yet profound. Respect is not a commodity to be traded or withheld. It is not dependent on wealth, fame, or power. True respect is a reflection of one's own character. It is shown not because someone deserves it, but because it is the right thing to do. It is a gift given freely, without expectation, and in doing so, it elevates both the giver and the receiver. Victor, standing behind the desk, finally spoke to himself, almost as a confession. I thought power was control. I thought authority was respect. I was wrong. True power, true respect, comes from humility, not arrogance. The staff gathered, exchanging quiet nods, their eyes reflecting the silent agreement that things had changed. They had witnessed a rare phenomenon, the transformation of a space of people, of attitudes, through a lesson in quiet dignity. The echoes of Jonathan Roumie's actions would linger far beyond the hours of that evening, influencing how they treated one another, their guests, and anyone who crossed their paths in the future. Jonathan's visit, brief and understated, had left a mark that no procedure, policy, or training seminar could replicate. The lesson was clear. Arrogance is temporary. Pride is fragile, but respect, earned, given, and reciprocated, is timeless. And perhaps most importantly, the story reminded everyone that the way we treat others when we think no one is watching defines who we truly are. It is easy to be respectful to someone with fame, influence, or power. The real test lies in how we behave toward those we consider ordinary, unimportant, or beneath us. True character is revealed in those moments, and the consequences, whether immediate or delayed, can be life-changing. As the lobby gradually returned to normal, the lesson remained. It lingered in hushed whispers, in the thoughtful expressions of staff, in the subtle nods of guests who had witnessed it. Jonathan Roumie had departed quietly, leaving behind no spectacle, no fanfare, only a lesson, simple yet profound, that would resonate for years to come. So, as you go about your day, remember this. Respect isn't something you show only to those in positions of power. It's something you show to everyone, especially when you think no one is watching. One day, the person you look down on could be the one you end up learning the most from or even working for. True power is silent. True respect is earned. True humility is strength. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is real power. Share where you're watching from. I want to acknowledge every person who values dignity and character. And remember, it's never too late to choose humility over arrogance, kindness over judgment, and respect over pride. Those choices define the legacy you leave behind, far beyond fame, fortune, or position.